All right. It is 1 o'clock. Stop sharing here. So I'd like to ask all the subcommittee members to share cameras if they can and unmute. And we'll do a little roll call. I already know that Peter and Judy will be late, if at all. And unfortunately, we do have the chat enabled here. I'm going to ask everyone not to use it, but I will read anyone who mentions the chat publicly. So that's from Corey Bell saying she's got spotty internet, and if she gets kicked off, she might get kicked off just due to her location. So she's here. And with that, I'll run through the roll call list and we can see who else is here. Andrew, is he here? No. Carol?
Here.
Pam?
Here.
Well, Judy, I said would be late. Augustine?
Here.
And then Sam, I think I saw
Here.
Sam. Perfect. Peter also said he'd be late. Anyone here from Diane Anderson? Don't see her here. And then Corey?
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can,
Yeah.
great. And I'm here as well. So, okay. With that, I know we haven't had a whole lot of time to look at the document that got shared directly before this meeting, but I think that's still fine. Augustine, I'm going to pass the mic off to you.
Sure. So should we, you want to share the document or should we talk about what we had first?
Let's recap what we had first, and then we'll talk
Okay.
about it from there.
Yeah, so last meeting, we talked about distributing the tasks on certain sections. I think the starting point we had was really good with Judy's Excel spreadsheet. I think it was great. We had a lot of good points and all that stuff in there. One thing that came out of the last meeting was to make it into a kind of more usable document, something that would resemble the final product and easier to track changes. So it's a Word document now. And as part of the distribution of tasks last meeting, we split up some sections that were maybe suited to different people to have kind of a easier to digest information in that. I got a couple of them back yesterday or last couple of days. I'm putting together in the document. So the document that was shared kind of encompasses the sections that I got from folks and all of the comments that we had put into the Excel spreadsheet that Judy created with the most current comments or notes in that. So the document it's a little bit, some bullet points, some text paragraphs and things. So it's a little bit of mix of both, but I figured what we would do is as we kind of fine tune this, we would turn those bullet point sections into text and then maybe pare down some of the sections. I think the sections that we have, like Chris's section on ELTAC accreditation and Carol's were really good and concise and nice. And then my section was, I think, way too long. So mine might need to come down a little bit, but it'll be I think something we can work on. And the other sections that we're missing, I think we can kind of work together as a group and get those details kind of filled in. Did you guys get a chance to take a look at that document? I know it was very short notice, but Sam, Pam, Carol, did you guys get a chance to look at those guys? Any comments or anything?
I did not, unfortunately. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it was very short notice. But we can go over a couple sections. I think that worked, Chris.
That works.
All right.
Yeah, and apologies about the short notice, but it seems like this month has not been good to schedule anyone for any meetings. And I think I'm lucky to get 6 of us here today.
Yeah, it's been tough for everybody. Like I got in actually late yesterday from being out of town for a couple of weeks. So it's tough for everybody. But let me see if I could share this very quickly. bring it up. Okay.
So while Augustine, while you're pulling that up as well, I'll note that we had Jerry Parr from the NELAC Institute share. I am not sure how or where he got this from, but an EPA validation guidance document from 1987 that covers kind of a little bit of the flow chart and kind of the broad strokes that I think we were trying to capture in this document as well. It is a little old. It's got some information in there that's probably not there we go. Augustine, you should be able to do it now.
Got it.
Sorry, I'm trying to talk and do things
No
at the
worries.
same time. But it's got a little bit of information that probably needs to be updated and some that needs to be scrubbed as well. But I think that's kind of the formatting and theme that we're going to want to capture moving forward. So I think we'll push that off as a bullet point to review at the end of just if anyone wants to take a tackle of reading and providing some comments there as well. So then Augustine, I'll move it back to you.
Cool. Yeah, and on that topic of Jerry's email, that was great. I've actually never seen that document before. I was sure that something like that had to exist. And I actually looked for it before I left and trying to get an idea of what the format should be like, and I cannot find it. So it's great that he sent it. I do think it is a little outdated. It's using the kind of the old EPA template, but it's got a lot of good information on what needs to be in where and all that stuff. So I think that'd be a good template to use. And at the very least, we should have it as a reference for this to, oops, I'm getting notifications here. So yeah, I think it's great to have that as a basis. So the document now as it's listed or shown is going to be no table of contents for now. I figured it'd be a little bit flexible until we get a final layout, and then we'd have a table of contents up front and all these sections. So it starts off, I think, with what was important with the mission statement that Carol put together was great. I think it gives us idea of what the document should be. And I figured that as we go through this document, if there are comments or anything, this Word document has a track changes enabled. So if you want to make changes to those and send them to me, I'll compile them in one document. That way we're not all communicating, so that I could have everything in one document. I'll put all the changes in or all the suggestions. If there are multiples, we'll put them all in there, and then we can cover those at the next meeting. Yeah, but I think it's we'll start with the mission statement, give an idea of what we have, and what it should be used for. And I added the creation request and where the questions and requests would come from. This is what Chris put together. I think was really helpful. And I also wanted to have a blurb, and I wanted to ask what you guys thought of how to use the document. I feel like sometimes these are not so user-friendly. You have this document that's 200 pages long. Not that ours is going to be that long, but something that's very, very long. And it's daunting as somebody who's developing a method or gets a request from ELAP or another state entity saying, hey, you need to follow this document. And it's hard to kind of digest. So I don't know if that's something that you guys thought would be helpful or not helpful on a little guide on how to use this document. What's the consensus?
I think it would be helpful.
Yeah,
It
I think so.
doesn't need to be very long.
Yeah, it should be very short. I don't think it should be a step by step for everything, but it may be a paragraph or two at most of what to do, how to use it and how to look at it and all that stuff. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I had the feeling that might be one of the last things we write up.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, after we get everything put together, the checklist and all of the details, then we can say, okay, looking at the final product, what's the roadmap on how to use it? And I think it's something that we mentioned before. I think Peter brought it up. So yeah, I agree. I think once we get it all wrapped up, that would be a useful thing to have in there. So yeah, we'll push that off to the end. And then the rest of the document is going to be stuff that was in the checklist for the most part that Judy put together. we do have this small list of definitions that was at the beginning of the Excel spreadsheet. I don't know if the definition should be included like this up front and have a big old long list of things, or in the relevant sections. I find it to be maybe a little more useful in the relevant sections, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm not going to sit through and read 2 or 3 pages of definitions and then go in and start reading the document, because I'm going to forget and it won't be so helpful. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Should we put it at the beginning? Should we break it up into the sections?
I think
I
the
like-
only,
Go ahead, Sam.
oh yeah. So I think the only advantage to having this in the beginning is that a lot of these kind of overlap. Well, they can be applicable to the different like sections. So having it in the front would, in that sense, it would make sense. But at the same time, I mean, I guess some of these only apply to certain testing, like if they're like microbiology definitions, that would only apply to microbiology. But I think overall, having it in the front would just make it easier, and that way you don't have, it's not repetitive throughout the document.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me.
So my suggestion would be is that we try and mimic a little bit like TNI where possible, and not contradict TNI, because that's going to be the basis of our foundation, right, for California. So like, I'm just looking at the accuracy. It's not the same between TNI and this document. I think if TNI has a definition in their document, we leave it and then only specify which ones are not in TNI that we need to define. But I think that we do need to define our acronyms and our special terms if we use them up front. I think it's easier because if you're in one section that happens to reference another, you don't want to have to try and figure out what that other section is. So my
That's a
vote
good
would be
point.
up front, unless it duplicates TNI, and then take it out.
Okay, yeah, and that works.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually liked your suggestion of have definitions for each section, but just thinking about it, we should really limit how many we're going to do, and maybe it should just be acronyms if you're going to do it per section, and then have an index of definitions, and then point to TNI volume 1 for definitions that are commonly used, because Pam's right, that is the standard at which everything's going to be operating under. So in theory, everyone has access to that coming in.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think it makes sense. I was thinking it'd be easier for digesting it to have them in sections, but I think it makes sense what Pam mentioned, that putting them together in one spot would make more sense. Cool. That works.
Also easier for update.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And
Plus-
should we have it as detailed as we have now, or can we just have maybe special things defined here and then everything else referenced TNI? What do you guys think?
I think I would only if it's something that's specific to this document that's not in TNI. Otherwise, we shouldn't be trying to redefine something at all. So,
Oh, yeah, I
Well-
agree.
Here's a question for you. Since is this document only going to be made available to people who are trying to get accredited? Or is it going to be out there for everybody to access? I only say this because you keep saying, refer to TNI. Well, what if there's a laboratory who's found this to be a useful document and for whatever reason is not TNI or not going to be TNI or don't have access to TNI standard?
we have to be careful about copying TNI standards, because that's a copyright also. So
No, I understand that, but we could check TNI's definition and see if it is a generally accepted definition, and then it's not necessarily copying TNI.
True. But, I think that there are lots of documents out there. This is specifically for the labs that are seeking accreditation in California. If others want to use it, maybe they need to either look at the references that we're looking at or get TNI.
Okay,
Yeah.
then we may want to put some sort of like subnote in there that the purpose of this, along with our mission, is the purpose of this document is to be used by TNI or laboratories seeking accreditation by California ELAP. A copy of TNI is important to the understanding of this document, or something like that. Just so that they know that they should have TNI when also looking through our document.
I think to your point too, Carol, it is to be used by a California state agency. So if another entity happens to find it useful, that's good, but ultimately we want it to be used in California, and our regulations require the use of TNI, and it would be a regulatory method used by an ELAP laboratory, which would then also have incorporating the TNI standard as well. So
Okay. Then that takes care of my concern.
Oh, yeah, I think it's a valid concern to bring up. So we'll have to double check to make sure that we're not copying TNI or, possibly infringing on their copyright. So that's also a good point. Yeah, so I think we can parse this down to be just the essential definitions. Also might be something for later when we finish it, once we have an idea of what's in there and what's not in there. Then we can kind of figure that out. So the rest of the section, the rest of the document is going to have these sections that we're still kind of waiting on. I don't have the assignments. I don't know if you have them handy, Chris, of who's going to do which parts. But I know that there were a couple that we did not assign that we would figure we'd start looking at later. But as we get these sorted out, I think the move would be for the folks who are doing those to just start editing in this document and send it back to me, and I'll compile it all together. But what I did do is enter, all of the details and kind of comments that we put together in the Excel document. Some of them are comments. Some of them are bullet points, in each section. Like in this one, to identify, qualitative methods, screening methods, kind of some limits that we might have to have in there. The ones that we definitely didn't assign last time that are the kind of the big ones to deal with are the precision and accuracy. And these, I think, need to be pretty, they have to be obviously pretty good, because that's going to be what we base the methods on, if they're good or not. And also we need to make sure, to Pam's point, that it does match with what TNI says. Like ultimately, we need to make sure that everything that goes in here can't be so different or can't go against what TNI says. Then we can maybe have things that are more strict as an option. For example, in the section I did on sensitivity, I did put in some comments about LQ verifications, LD verifications from like DoD kind of guidance that maybe is not necessary under TNI, but maybe good to have. But I think it's something that we do need to be more concerned with. Make sure that we don't go against what TNI says. The thing with precision accuracy is I don't know if it should be one person working on it, or should we assign it to a group of people? What do you think, Chris? Should we distribute it, or does anybody want to volunteer to do this? Or volunteer someone who's not on the call? I guess we could do that too.
right, yeah, I know folks still need to get some items to you. But yeah, if somebody feels the urge to tackle it, then I would say we could give it to them. But if you don't want to tackle it, then we'll have to figure out how we're going to assign those kinds of things. I think we want to at least have somebody set up a framework, right? Precision, here's the ways that you can determine precision, right? Because we don't want it to be prescriptive. We want it to be to reference where we can. And I know, at least looking through your document, there's a lot of things in here that look like they were copy pasted. And I was going to say, I think we can just point,
Mhm.
right? So for precision and accuracy, you can say, here's a few ways, and then point to another document and say, see this, give a little descriptive blurb of what it is, and then reference it with a hyperlink if we can, but if we can't, then document citation. So maybe somebody getting the framework for what precision and accuracy tools are available. Maybe that would be good. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that would make sense, and then we can start filling in the gaps. And I agree with the copy and paste stuff. Maybe not necessary. I guess we'd have to see what the. I guess the only question I have is if someone's reviewing the method, like let's say if a method developer develops a method based on this, they look up the criteria for precision accuracy, whatever we reference, or the MDL, for example. And then it's the data package or whatever is submitted is reviewed by somebody at a state entity that maybe is not familiar with those things. Would it be helpful to have some guidance or something in the document so they don't have to go pull up the EPA MDL procedure or the precision or whatever, or should we just have everybody kind of look it up as they need to verify stuff or confirm things?
So I was missing last time, and so I'm a little confused here. What are the purpose of like these sections on the precision and accuracy? And I'll explain where my confusion is I thought that we were looking to try and give guidelines for determining the data quality objectives, but you have to know how to do precision and accuracy. If you're going to be an accredited lab, there's lots of places to learn how to do it, figure out how to do it. Here are the data quality objectives, but are we teaching them how to do precision and accuracy, or just what their limits would be based on, or how to determine the limits?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if it was like a lab developing these methods, really should know how to do all the stuff. Like the document should be kind of redundant, because if they don't know how to determine precision accuracy, I don't think they should be developing methods, or being able to determine the sensitivity of a technique. If they can't figure out what the method detection limit is, maybe not a good idea to develop a method. But if we're going to be using this document for other folks that are maybe less familiar with lab techniques and stuff,
I don't think we can go there, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of my impression is you have to have a certain basis in order to be able to learn how to do this. We're not going to teach you every calculation. So like at the TNI meetings earlier this month, that they were talking about some of the the standard interpretation requests. And one of the things that they very much stay away from is how to do a procedure. Here's the guidelines, here's the framework that you need to stay under, but how you get there, as long as you meet the end goal, that's up to you. And maybe we're looking a little bit more into a how, but there are different ways of doing the precision and accuracy. I think that labs should be determining that, but based on what they have available, what their criteria is, but then coming up with what those.
Agreed.
And maybe that's some of what you're doing is these limits, but.
Agreed, but at the same time, we're having this document available to the regulators to be able to look at this document and look at a method and say, is it a good method for my purposes? Is it valid? So in some sense, we have to give a little bit of an understanding, because your regulators aren't going to have it.
And
that end.
Then to the original point, we're not going to necessarily want to send them to 5 different documents to figure out, right?
I agree to the point of we should talk about what it is, maybe some of the common equations that are used, or like for the regulators, it would be the most common ways they would see precision reported by a laboratory. And then make it understood that laboratories have the ability to choose their way of determining the precision of their method. So we're not necessarily prescribing it, but we're giving some background information for the regulators to understand what precision of a data report means, how it can be reported, and that they should be looking for some sort of precision out of the method that they're looking at. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think so. To me, it makes sense. Chris, what do you think for the end use of the document from the perspective of ELAP? Does that make sense, or what would you see?
Carol nailed it like 100%. And that's why I'm saying we would want to touch on just a little bit, but then kind of say, for those who want to go into the weeds, here's some weeds, right? You know, we want to say,
Those who want to
yeah,
smoke the weeds, they're right here.
right, yeah. So yeah, just kind of a overview. I like your idea, Carol, of here's common ways that it's done. That way we can say it's not the only way, but here's common ways. Because like Pam's right too, we don't want this to be prescriptive. We don't want somebody coming back and saying, well, I followed the thing, how come my method isn't approved? You know, because ultimately that's going to be whatever the regulatory purpose is going to be, that's going to determine those kinds of limits. And then Pam, go ahead.
Oh, and the nature of the tests too, because microbiological tests are going to represent precision in a different way than an analytical test is, from a different way as asbestos does. So you can't have a one size fits all at all, because we're just looking at too many different types of sciences, in there.
Yeah. And then to Pam, to your point, I think we do want to have like a recommended like goalpost for precision and accuracy. So, we want percent recovery should be, recommended is 30% recovery, or whatever value we want to give for whatever field we want to have. It's hard to speak so generally, but
It is, and I don't want to necessarily give like you need to be 60 to 140.
Exactly, yeah.
Because that does become difficult. But how do we determine whether 60 to 140 is valid, or 30 to 170?
Well, one thing that we could always use is look at other accepted methods for your technology.
Mm-hmm.
Because then at least those other methods have looked at the technology and its variability, and those methods usually put in some sort of default methods or default criteria associated with it. If they're trying to apply an existing set of compounds to a new technology, they could just start at what do the methods for those compounds tend to give, and start there as kind of their, okay, these are we're going to look at defaults with our new technology, and in theory their technology should hopefully become better. Mm-hmm. So there's ways that we can not maybe define it, but tell them where to look for their starting points.
So as we get into those limit type things, we get into error, mm-hmm. and determining the error. We had to determine for the DoD labs, they had to determine an error around their stated LOQs, mm-hmm. and it was not an easy process. It was 20 spikes every lab had to do 20 spikes at their LOQ to determine it. You know, a lot of the EPA methods say 4, everything's 4, and 4 doesn't get you very much statistics at all. But the way the DoD did do it to establish that relative error that you were using is you did the 20 spikes, you ran the control charts, you know, and there's references for running control charts. Then you set your limits based on that. And then you're supposed to try and improve around it. But yeah, my recommendation would be to try and stay away from the 4, which tends to show up a lot, and make it a larger amount, or based on a similar technology method criteria, using a larger.
I know that the international standards have gone for their error, they're calling their measurement uncertainty.
Yes,
And
yeah, that's what I was
yeah.
going to, yeah.
Yeah, and in the measurement uncertainty, it states you should, you know, you need to use 20 points to set it. You can use fewer points to give you an idea, but they say 20 points to set it, to establish it. So
And that's a good reference.
yeah, and so you could, not that everybody can get a hold of the international standards, but they can purchase them if they want. But you know, there's all sorts of different documents out there that define how to determine measurement uncertainty, in all sorts of different ways, you know, from manufacturers on through to analytical analysis type thing. So, you know, if you could make a reference to that concept in this document as well, if we so feel.
I think that would be good to include some level of uncertainty.
Because
measurement.
because the 2017 well, actually the 17025 document has all sorts of references to measurement uncertainty going on now. And when TNI catches up to the 2017 document, they're going to have to incorporate measurement uncertainty more.
Yeah, and actually they have measurement uncertainty in there, but it's up to the lab to determine how they set it.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. So I'm gonna push something, and Pam, feel free to say no, but I think I think you are volunteering to write a small blurb about uncertainty and common or possible ways to measure it as part of an essential method component.
I will draft something up. Carol, if it would be okay if I could shoot it back to you for input.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, you can do up to 4 people.
Yeah, I'm just looking to make sure that I'm on the right track if I'm volunteering. So this is like a separate section, the measurement uncertainty that you're looking for.
I think that would be good. I mean,
Okay.
You know, all of these kind of bleed together a little bit.
Exactly. And
Well,
measurement uncertainty you use to determine your RPDs and your
control limits.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, because you determine your measurement uncertainty. I think that's 2 standard deviations, and control limits are 3 standard deviations of basically a very similar set of values. So it kind of makes sense.
Carol, which document were you referencing, do you know, for the international?
Oh, ISO 17025.
Okay, that doesn't have the 20 points in it. That's why I was wondering if you had something.
Oh, it's our accreditation body's internal document. I can get you a copy of that if you'd like.
Okay, got it. That's probably A2LA?
Yeah, it's A2LA. That's who we're accredited by.
Yeah, and again, that's that's how they are looking for it.
Yeah. But I do believe, if I remember correctly, I think they have some references in there that we could use.
Okay.
So would that have to have a more detailed procedure, you think, or can we let people figure it out on their own?
I think we need a little bit more of a guideline for it, because what a lot of labs end up doing for measurement uncertainty on an existing method is they use their control charts. You know, they have 20 to 1,000 points and they're generating limits from. We're talking about establishing a new method and coming up with setting a measurement uncertainty. And that was, to my point, is 4 does not give you a measurement uncertainty. And that's what's, you know, if you're looking at 1613 and some of those other documents, the IPR and the OPR are 4 spikes, but it's on an established document that there were hundreds of points to set those DQOs. And that's really what labs don't usually do, and what we're kind of asking them to do is, what are the data quality objectives of the method that you're setting? And that may be very well superseded by what the regulatory agency says is, you know what, we can't tolerate this level of uncertainty. So we're not going to accept your, you know, you ran 20 points and you got a measurement of uncertainty of 30 to, 170. Well, that may not be acceptable to how the regulator needs to use the data, and that they need less uncertainty around the number. And then, so to my point, I think that we need to have a two-way conversation from the lab. The lab hears how you could do it, run 20 points, run a control chart, and say, that's what my uncertainty is. But then the regulator also has to know how they're going to use the data, and they need to come back and say, we need you to hit an uncertainty within this portion based on the method that you're developing. And if your method is not that accurate or that precise or that sensitive, try again.
And a lot of laboratories will sometimes treat measurement uncertainty the same way they do with MDLs.
Mhm.
And they extract them all in a single day.
Yeah.
Where measurement uncertainty, the idea is you're supposed to extract an LCS per day for 20 days. And then you're supposed to run them once a day for 20 days. So that the idea is that and try to use as many different analysts as possible, the whole thing. You want to incorporate all the potential variability you absolutely could get in there.
And that's where we go to ruggedness.
Yes. And, if you don't do that, you end up with measurement uncertainty that's too tight.
Mhm.
It won't work for the purposes that you need. And you don't want to set yourself that tight. You have to go through and just like your LOD and LOQ, you need to check your measurement uncertainty every once in a while as well, to make sure that it's going to widen as an instrument gets older. It's going to widen as an instrument gets dirty. But that very much that initial one, you basically got a nice clean instrument, a brand new instrument that you're trying to develop a method on, and you're developing a method from scratch. And if you don't try to catch everything in there, you really are going to say, look, my measurement uncertainty is 5, when, in a week's time of running samples on that instrument, it turns into 25. So don't cut your feet off at the ankle. Give yourself, and that's where we may want to give a little more encouragement to the laboratories to do it. Yes, it's a pain in the butt. You got to do it for 20 days. You have one person extracting an LCS and a method blank, and that's all they're doing. And yes, it gets frustrating and that kind of thing, but it's really beneficial to getting a good measurement uncertainty.
Mhm.
A realistic one too. That's, I think,
Right.
Yeah.
what we should emphasize, that it's got to be real.
Yeah.
I think something that also would come up is maybe some of the regulators aren't so familiar with these techniques, and they say, oh, well, the lab says they can get 5% uncertainty, and they expect that forever. And once that, instrument starts to get dirty or old or whatever, it goes to 25, they would think that the data is maybe not suitable, when really it was just a poorly set limit at the beginning.
There
Yeah,
are regulators out there that think MDLs are real numbers, so you
Don't
gotta
they know
remember
that the M, don't they know the M is made up?
Yeah, no, they think they're real numbers. Believe me, I keep trying to train the regulators I work with and say, those are not real numbers, and don't ever believe that they are.
But what is the error around the number? That's what's important. And that's what we need to define. So, okay, I will draft something. Maybe Carol send something to you. I may include some things like on ruggedness.
Speaking of ruggedness,
Yes.
Carol did provide
Oh,
Yeah.
good. I
a
didn't see. I
blurb
haven't read
on
the
ruggedness.
document.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carol's little thing was really great on ruggedness. Let me pull it up. Here it is. I don't know if Carol, you want to go over what you wrote. I thought it was great.
I researched every document, or I tried to find as many documents that I could that talked about ruggedness. I first went into our documents and said, what did you say for ruggedness? I found some other EPA documents that had talks, and basically nobody talks about ruggedness in any detail, because it's more of a statistical process that needs to be done. And it all says it has to, we can't tell you what to determine is your quality limiting factors in your method. So the idea is I gave a definition of what ruggedness referring to, and that it's you want to look at both avoidable and unavoidable factors that could influence your method, and that you would want to focus on those that are going to have the biggest impact. And then I actually found an ASTM method that I could get a copy of off the internet that gave an example of how to do a ruggedness testing with it was 8 different factors, and it showed you how to modify your test and those 8 different factors to then make determinations on your ruggedness and where you need to put in better defined instructions, especially like in things like temperature, if it really needs to be kept within, a 0.5 degree or within 2 degrees or something like that, that you could put those in. So like I say, I didn't put detail, I just referred people, and there were these 3 references that I kept seeing come up in every single document that talked about ruggedness. And so I just pulled those 3 references out as well. And one of them was this ASTM method.
So I'm just glancing through this and I'm probably missing something, but does it make sense to add something to how to, I like internal standards, isotope dilution, surrogates are a way that we can monitor the ruggedness on an ongoing basis. I
didn't get into that much detail.
I'm just wondering if we should note that to improve the ruggedness of a method, you should have what do I want to say, like monitors or indicators at different stages to determine if the ruggedness of the method is appropriate. And then have this up at the front of the document before we get into surrogates and internal standards. And
But then again, we're focusing, when we're talking about things like that, we're focusing more on the chemical nature. What about the toxicological? What about the microbiological? Do they have internal standards? Do they have ways of monitoring?
and they don't, but if they are available, we should be making sure we use them. I mean, if we set up an organic test without isotope dilution or a surrogate or some way to determine the extraction efficiency, is it really a good test? Because we know that we have those available.
Yeah, I think that's a good point of having.
Kind of depends upon the purpose. I mean, fuel analysis doesn't tend to have anything like that because.
Oh, it has a surrogate.
Oh, yes,
always.
It does have a surrogate. It
Always
does have
has a surrogate. Sometimes it has an internal standard.
And then you look at inorganics and hardly any of them have
No.
surrogates or internal standards. And
And so
we automatically assume that their digestions are complete.
But in those cases, we have post-digestion spikes and serial dilutions.
Which most people don't understand how to apply. I'll just throw that out there. I've spent more time explaining those two. So
it's not a big deal. I'm just
it's one of those. I mean, we could put in, maybe what we do is add a notation that it's always a good idea when available to have some sort of references such as isotope dilutions or surrogates to help monitor your ruggedness whenever possible. I mean, that's
all I'm looking for.
That could be an easy blurb at the end of this ruggedness testing section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all I'm looking for, because like the first test for like 1,4-dioxanes came out with nothing, you know, and we went away from those methods after a while, after we started using isotope dilution and surrogates.
Well, and that's the thing,
such.
people found better ways. And part of me thought to put that in, and the other part of me said, we're dealing with people who are developing potentially better methods than what are currently there. Because what we have are not good for these compounds. Like the 1,4-dioxane. You know, everybody's that 1,4-dioxane. Oh, obviously it could be done by GCMS. So we should be able to just use any of the GCS methods and it would work fine. And we found that it was not good for that. And we started applying other technologies as they came along, and we've now found a better way of testing for it. So I'm almost wondering, it's like this document is for those people who are more aware of the technologies and the capabilities that are out there in the industry now, and are trying to use those for both identification of existing compounds that are not the best, or in developing for new methods or new compounds. So I was almost kind of like, am I offending you by assuming that you wouldn't think about isotope dilution and putting surrogates in? You know,
So,
I don't know.
Well, so I remember when MTBE and 1,4-dioxane were both emerging contaminants, and that data was crap, you know, and we used it to set regulatory limits. But, you know, MTBE, it wasn't confirmed. That was part of the part of the ruggedness of this was that, you know, we just ran it under GRO. And if you saw a diesel or, you know, gas pattern, you called it MTBE. And then we went back through decades of data and said, oh, look, that's not MTBE. What do you know? And, you know, the 1,4-dioxane, we purged it. We thought, oh, that's great. You know, it's wonderful. Then we started adding the isotopes and realized, oh, it's really not coming out very well. So and those were cutting edge, new technologies that were used, and great scientists missed the ball on that. Yes, we are better now, PFAS. There isn't a PFAS method that isn't set up without the labeled compounds. But if we have the next emerging contaminant, how are we going to keep track of it? The microplastics, I've just glanced at that briefly, but how do we make sure that those are plastics and not some of these other contaminants? Those are part of what we need to recover, or to include. And so I'd like to see the ruggedness include something to make sure that we are getting the correct identification, which is important, like the MTBE, it wasn't. And then something for the quantification or checking for losses during the test. And it doesn't need to be real detailed, just adding that in, that how to take this ruggedness idea and make it applicable is really kind of what I'm looking for on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think we also have sections on selectivity and specificity and all that stuff. So I think it should be included there. But one
Right,
thing
and if we can say that's leading towards the ruggedness, just kind of linking these sections together.
I can see that because ultimately that should be addressed earlier in the method. Where I see ruggedness come in is after, where you feel you have confidence in your method to be able to properly select the compound, properly identify it, all those things. Then you're getting into the ruggedness, into how much can I wiggle this method and still, and either improve or start losing capabilities. Have I found a minimum temperature, and I find that if I increase the temperature, I get better recoveries or better selectivity or something like this. That's kind of where I see the ruggedness coming in. So I think we need to address the need for monitoring and that kind of stuff earlier in the process before we get to the ruggedness. Not to say that we can't just still in the ruggedness, make sure that you monitor, whenever possible, can monitor losses and effects onto the analysis, because not every matrix is going to react the same, in this procedure. But I think kind of where you're going at, I think we want to address that earlier in this, and then maybe just re-emphasize it at this stage.
Yeah, I think that stuff could be addressed as like a method performance, because what we also have to remember is that the regulators are going to look at this, and where a method developer probably knows that, oh, I should use isotolution for, PFAS, especially emerging short chain, something unique or weird. Yeah, it should be isotolution. But maybe a regulator who doesn't have experience with that, or doesn't really know and thinks that all methods are the same, won't know that should be done with isotolution. So I would want to make sure that doesn't, not like a method developer won't sneak it in, but they say, oh yeah, this totally works because IS is too expensive, or they don't want to use it, or for whatever reason. And then the regulator might not know, oh yeah, I guess the developer says it's cool. So I do think that we should include that just as a minimum. The method performance should be adequate for this. For example, you need to have a way to measure the extraction efficiency, measure the ionization efficiency for methods that use extraction or ionization like LCMS, and just have examples of how that's done. But let the developer figure it out. Obviously, we're not going to tell them how to do everything, but just so that the regulator knows, oh, I should be looking for these things. And maybe have a section up front with the performance, and kind of lump those missing little lonely sections together as a method performance section.
So for me, like, I feel like what we kind of discussed, like, things like when we talk about examples like temperature, varying the temperature, varying the pH, I feel like that's all kind of part of the method development. And you kind of optimize the method with the best pH for like a reagent you're going to use or something like that, or the best temperature you're going to be using as part of the PCR profile. But to me, I feel like ruggedness is, like Carol mentioned, it's after you develop the method. It's okay. So I've developed the method, I've optimized it. But now, what are some of the kind of the variables that will lead to variability? Things like different instrument platforms. If I use a different instrument, am I going to get some, is the accuracy going to change? If I have a different analyst perform that method, is it going to change? But to me, I mean, I feel like maybe there's got to be some clarity as to what should be part of method development and then what comes afterwards. And to me, that's my understanding of what ruggedness is after you develop the method, okay, so what are some of the variables that you may get some variations in your accuracy?
I look at it as how sloppy can I be and still get a good number?
There you go. Okay.
I was
Because
gonna
that's
jump
all
in.
the explanations were kind of that, saying, if you find that it's a very small temperature range, or like they say, you need to have the sample analyzed at room temperature or something like that. It's one of those things. It's like, okay, so how many shortcuts can the analyst in the laboratory do before they start really messing with the numbers? Or the field staff, or the whoever's going to end up using this method.
I was going to jump in and say this is what the branch of US EPA does when they're doing drinking water methods. This is the how can I break my method part, right? What things, if I mess up, is it no longer the method that I want it to be anymore? So yeah, I think we're all in agreement. This is kind of the end step of the essential method components.
And they say you could do it all along, but they say ultimately you want to do it just before you send it out for an inter-laboratory study. Because the idea is you've made all the defined characteristics of the method that you want the laboratory. So the idea is the laboratory should, all the different laboratories using it should be using it the same way everyone else is, and you've already taken the wiggle room out of it. So you are really seeing variation from laboratory to laboratory when you end up with that study. They turn around and say, well, you could do it with your interlaboratory study, but then you just got too much data to try and muffle through.
Yeah, then you have a lot of stuff. Okay, so what I'm hearing is we need to kind of reorganize how we have a few things laid out, right? We need to kind of reorient and make sure that we have in this essential method component type section, the last part is going to be ruggedness. Beforehand, we're going to have some sort of overly broad category called method performance, where we're going to touch on internal standards, surrogates, those kinds of things, in addition to precision and accuracy and sensitivity, right? We have kind of those key parts. And then at the beginning, we have calibration, which is going to be part of the method development part anyway. And then I think holding time and stability falls kind of as a subset of ruggedness testing. How long is my sample going to be stable for? So I think we can slice that in as a sub point to ruggedness as well. Does anyone feel like we're missing any of these components?
I don't think so. I mean, we'll probably know once we get it all put together, but it seems like it's most of what we talked about in the last couple of meetings are in there. And I do like it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was looking at the definitions, and we have something there on specificity. I'm not sure I agree with that definition. I don't understand that definition, actually.
Take a
But
look. Yeah, I'm not sure where
So-
these came from. These are all pulled in from the Excel. So I
Right,
think the
yeah.
definitions we should standardize with TNI.
Right, and in that, I mean, there is something, what definition did they use? Now, I mean, I think that's kind of what I think of the specificity somewhat being, you know, do you have the correct identification, and or maybe it's somewhere else in there. I'm not seeing where have we determined?
Yeah, there's a little section on specificity that it was not filled in.
Okay,
And one thing that I made a comment on that section in, I don't know what document it is. I think one of the EU documents, they talk about, oh, it's not here, but they talk about points of identification, which I think might be useful to have in here, where you need to have at least, you know, some number of points of identification to confirm that something is what you think it is. And it could be retention time, mass, ion ratios, MRMs, or something.
mhm.
And what they
Yeah,
do is
exactly.
for different techniques, like for tandem mass spec, you must have 2 points of identification. For single quad mass spec, you must have 3, or, you know, things like that. I don't know if we should have a table like that. And I will dig up that document.
I think we need it. That
Yeah,
I
I do
that
think
we
so. And the only thing I worry about is if we set something up that is okay for today, what if technology changes? But at that point, I think we should just update the document to reflect the new technology so that we're not limited to old things like the BFB tune check or DFTBB tune on a GCMS. That still is, or now is not as much, but it's still a requirement for triple quad instruments, which doesn't make sense. So I do think that we should be aware of those things.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think as part of the specificity, we need to have those points of identification. So I could volunteer to write that up
Okay.
as a section.
Yeah, and that's, I don't think like where you're talking about the 2 points or the 3 points, I don't think that those types of things are going to change. You know, that kind of leads into, you know, GC, you know, they talk about in some of the GC methods why it's not as a determinative, at the wrong word there, method as GCMS is,
Mhm.
because you don't have the mass spectra. All you have is the retention times on 2 different columns, but you need the retention time on 2 different columns. You can't just say 1 column retention time is enough, you know,
Yeah.
and you know, that was where we made the mistake years ago on MTBE.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Um,
I'll write up that section because I think that's something that came
That's
up as
great.
I was putting this together that I felt we needed more details. Maybe not make it prescriptive, but say, hey, this is what is normally accepted, and you should have at least these points of
Yeah,
identification.
and I did finally find the selectivity. I
I was
think
about to
that's
say, TNI does have a definition of selectivity in it.
right. Yeah, and that's what we don't have selectivity. We have specificity, which I don't think we need. I think
Specificity. Yeah.
I'm not sure what is meant by that. Test samples
So,
should contain related analytes.
I'm gonna jump in and tag Sam because this is part of the inclusivity, exclusivity for micro.
Okay, thank you.
And Sam provided a specific calculation as well for specificity for in terms of determining the specific target organism versus something else.
Yeah, so thanks, Chris. And so in the method validation, the document from US EPA for microbiological methods, they do have, you know, the definition of specificity. They do have a formula, like a calculation you can use. And so essentially, it's just the number of samples that tested negative correctly versus, or, you know, divided by the total number of samples that were tested positive incorrectly, in addition to the number of samples that were tested negative incorrectly. So I want to say, so this probably should be like an add-on, Augustine, to what you were mentioning. And it's on the spreadsheet if you just want to kind of copy and paste it, or I'd be more than happy to work on that section with you, Augustine.
Okay, that'd be great. If you could, or I'll send you a little framework or something. And then if you want to fill in the gaps and send it back, then we'll put it together in there.
Sounds good.
Sounds
And
good.
and then just maybe something I want to bring up. Augustine, you had a shared document like early on. Is that something that we can still continue to do? I felt like that was a really good process. We could just go into that document and update each section as we needed.
I guess that's a question for Chris. Is that legally okay? I mean, yeah, I
Um,
agree. I think it's the
It's
best.
fine if you're doing it with less than the quorum of members. So you're not going to be able to create something that's shared that everyone can view. What you can do is you can create a bunch of different shared ones, or figure out how to, I don't know if you have some sort of fancy program where you can check out and you can see who's checked out what thing and upload. But as long as all members can't view other people's changes, the whole point is that we come here and we discuss, hey, I did this, I did that. And that way the public has input and knows what we're doing. We're not doing anything behind their backs kind of thing.
Yeah, what I could do is I could either share a unique link to everybody. So each person will have their own. So it's just me and that person looking at it. Or I could just restrict access. So it's one person can only view. It might be easier to give one link to each person. If that works, I could do that for this document and that other document that we had shared earlier, and give them to everybody.
Yeah, that sounds like it would work.
Okay, I will put that together and give everybody a unique link. I'll make it non-expiring. So the one, Sam, that you're talking about, that expired, I just had a short expiration date on that one so that we wouldn't be editing it, in public or not with the public looking. So then I'll share a new one that has an infinite expiration date so that we can work on that one together. And I'll put this document that we have now and the other one that I wrote together as one document and send it your way to everybody.
And just to be clear, if Sam makes edits, only you and Sam will be able to see changes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. That sounds good.
And then at the end, before our next meeting, I'll compile all of the changes from everybody into one master and then put it up that way.
That sounds good. Okay. So I have a few action items written down, and I want to kind of put a pause here and then pivot over to what the directive from full ELTAC was, because we do have 2 members of the public, quote unquote, or at least members not of this committee that are going to kind of touch on the microplastics method. So I think we want to kind of wrap up action items here, jump over to microplastics, and then jump back as time allows. So I have written down here for measurement error that Pam and Carol are going to take a crack at writing that kind of section. Overall, there needs to be a change in the order of how things are laid out in the document. But I think, Augustine, you're stuck with that one, unfortunately, as the master controller.
Yep, no problem.
I also have on here, Sam and Augustine are going to do some specificity and tables like that for those sections. And then I have written here is we need to revamp the definition section. But I don't have anyone having volunteered for that at this point.
Another thing that we need is specificity and selectivity, or on that are going to be 2 different things. So Sam's going to take care of the specificity, and I think Augustine was going to take care of the selectivity, the tables on how many points.
Of identification.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's fine. Okay, great. So, and
What kind of revamping needs to be done on the definitions?
more like we need to eliminate some and point to T&I for ones that we have, and then just kind of make sure that what we have isn't contradicting ourselves later on. So it might be a let's push it off until later kind of task.
Well, I could go in with the current definitions that we have, compare them to T&I, and identify those that are, I could go in and provide the TNI definition.
And you can just,
To-
if you do that, just put like TNI in front and then like in a parentheses.
The idea being is here's TNI's definition. This is what we have. Are we contradicting TNI in the direction that we're going? That's my thought. That's why I was going to put the TNI. And then
Yep.
the idea would be to eliminate both of them down the line. But that way, at least
Okay.
we know what we wrote in, what TNI has, and making sure that we're not contradicting TNI in the progression that we're going.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds great. You're signed up.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna pop over to my list that I had before. Peter was gonna kind of touch on environmental toxicity. He hasn't, at least I don't think he provided Augustine anything. And then we have Diane, who's gonna write something about holding time stability, and then Andrew was gonna touch on calibration. And I think those are still outstanding items, so we'll push them off to next meeting as well. So hopefully you get input from them for those ones.
Did you want me to chase them down for that data or that information?
Yeah, that might be good.
Sure. Yeah. I'll just send a gentle reminder, see if we
Yeah.
can remember to do that.
Yeah, and then you'll remain as document controller, so you can have them implement it however you want in that kind of sense, because nobody's said anything otherwise. So with that, we're gonna put a pause here on terms of the document as a whole, and I see we have Judy joining us. Thank you for joining, Judy.
Yeah, sorry for being late.
No worries. As I said earlier, this month's been pretty crazy for, I think, everyone here and everyone not here.
I'll be glad when August is over.
So for that, I'm going to pivot to the directive that the full ELTAC committee gave, which was to take a look at the microplastics method and use that as kind of an idea of how we could implement changes in the document that we have. I'm going to turn it over to Scott first, Scott Coffin from the Division of Drinking Water, who's really leading the charge in terms of moving the ball forward and complying with the legislative mandate that the Division of Drinking Water has regarding microplastics testing. We also have Charles Wong from Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. Cool, got it right. They're also affectionately known as Squirp. He's got something weird with his camera there, but who is the method developer and has been reviewing comments from a lot of the other participants, and then they're going to take some more as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it to you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. So I'll just give you first like a really high level overview of where we're at and what we're planning to do in the near future. So as you're familiar, we have this directive from the legislature to develop a method to monitor for microplastics in drinking water. And we've been working with Southern California Coastal Water Research Project and a number of labs from around the world to develop not just one, but several standard operating protocols to be used using different instrumentation. And this method, we have two methods that we're moving forward to verify and validate and request that ELAP provide accreditation for, and that's using FTIR or Raman spectroscopy. And we're hoping to get this method that we're going to send out to you out to the public by October, sometime like early October or late September. We're looking for. So if we could get ELTAC's review of that before it goes out to the public, it would be ideal. I think we discussed some dates before this of trying to meet that deadline. The other components that you should probably be aware of are the health effects workshop that we've been conducting to determine if there are health effects that we should be aware of and guide the monitoring. And that workshop has just finished up. And if you're interested about learning the health effects, our assessment, We're providing a public webinar on September 8th. Anybody can tune in. It'll be recorded too, so if you miss it, don't worry. But the findings from that, in brief, basically the science is just really, really new when thinking about the human health effects. So it's hard to put forward any like concrete number in terms of how much is too much in drinking water, but we were able to come up with a screening level that we can use as a data quality objective. So we have a pretty good idea of what level we want to get to in terms of like a detection limit. Really useful for the sampling and monitoring that we're going to be doing based on this method. And so what we need from you all, again, is to review the method, make sure that it's meeting all of your reality checks. And I think it'll be a really great exercise. Just been listening to you the past hour and 15 minutes. I think this would be a really good exercise to apply this sort of like framework that you're coming up with, looking through those lenses. And with that, I'll hand it over to Charles, who has more information.
Scott, could I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
At the TNI meeting, they talked about the NENC meeting earlier this month. They talked about the ASTM methods for microplastics. Were those part of your method development? I mean, were those reviewed as part of that, or?
They were not. They were not at a level of development for us to even consider when we initiated our project.
Okay.
And it's hard to review the ASTM methods because they don't provide any data in terms of like their inter-laboratory validation. And from what I understand is that they actually only have a single laboratory validation for the pyrolysis GCMS. So it's really difficult to know how well it performs. Whereas with our method, like we're trying to achieve as much transparency as possible. So that's where we're at right now. Things may change in the future though.
No, thank you. I just wanted to see which ones, whether it was similar, or whether you looked at it or considered it or not. But I agree they may not be interlab or very rugged. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Again, thank you for inviting me to this. I agree with Scott that I think it's going to be great. I mean, it was really helpful for you to let me sit in for the last hour and change on what you're doing. I think it's going to be a great exercise in application of the framework you're developing towards this specific method, which is what was discussed between ELAP and ELTAC earlier in the summer. So basically, the method that I provided, that we provided from the squirt microplastics intercalibration study, is on EPA's format. It's gone through a fair amount of review from, in no particular order, the State Water Board, from ELAP itself, from at least 2 EPA folks that are involved in method type stuff, or method type stuff involving microplastics, and 4 peer reviewers from the that were requested to review this from the microplastics intercalibration study. So they were part of some of the participating labs involved. So, and that's a good representation. There's 1 academic, there's 1 from a water utility, there's 1 from a wastewater utility, and there's 1 from another governmental regulatory agency. The comments were very good, improved it a lot, also very, very extensive, which is why I handed over the revised version to Scott Friday evening. I'm not sure, Scott, have you handed this over to anyone yet?
I have not. I've actually been in meetings all day, so I'm yet to check my email.
Okay, yeah. My hope was to get it early enough so you have a chance to look at it by this, but given the number of comments that was not going to happen. But I think it's substantially improved since then. My understanding is that Scott's going to pass the same version on to a couple of more EPA folks for their evaluation. So I welcome your inputs on this. To address I want to add a little bit in terms of the comparison to ASTM. I mean, Scott's absolutely correct in that, the ASTM methods, they don't provide you the data. And we have quite a bit of transparency involved in this because eventually we will have the manuscripts that are going to go into peer review that will be submitted along with this during the approval process. Those are basically at various stages of near completion at this point. But operationally, the method is actually very, very similar in terms of the lab processing as the ASTM method, which is basically for low particulate matter water, which is, drinking water. You size fractionate to a couple of different sizes and you put them on filters. That's basically that's basically what you've got for the ASTM processing method. So that part's pretty much identical. So I think that's pretty much about it. I'm happy to entertain further questions.
I'll touch on this just a little bit too, just for procedural notes. So we're not going to be commenting on it as a ELTAC subcommittee, or we're not making a formal recommendation or representation in any way. It's going to be individual comments from individual members of this subcommittee as commenters, just because it becomes kind of a headache with procedural changes and the timeline that DDW is looking for, not conducive to subcommittee work. So it'll be on your own time, but really we want to look at it in terms of how is it going to impact our document, because I think this is a good example of a technology that doesn't really exist in terms of wide use. So we might find like, hey, for these other stranger methods, we want to have some sort of catch or stop, or we need to add a section for this kind of thing. And that, so really we want to look toward it for that eye. And then if you want to provide Scott and Charles with comments on the method itself, that they would be very appreciative of that as well. So twofold.
So from the, I guess, the perspective of the subcommittee, should we be maybe putting together some comments for the subcommittee in terms of, not specifically to that method, but stuff that came up while reviewing the method?
Yeah. So yeah, one document for notes of like, oh, this is things we need to add to our guidance document, and then another document for comments to send to Scott, Charles.
Cool. That sounds good. So then no compiling necessary. The documents for Scott and Charles will send directly, and then the documents for the comments for the document will go to me, right?
I think there'll be more verbal discussion at our next meeting.
Cool, that works.
I do have one question, which is about what general time frame should I kind of imagine things might come down?
When would you send us the method?
That's up to Scott at the moment, because Scott's got it.
I can send it today. It sounds like the version that you have, Charles, is ready for their review, right?
Yeah, I would definitely send the clean version because you don't want to go through all those comments. You really don't.
So I would say that you tell us a timeline. If you want to set, where do we put this on our calendar? I think a 1 to 2 week time period probably is good to let us schedule in, but I would come back to you and ask, when do you want the feedback by?
Scott?
So like I mentioned before, we're trying to get this method out to the public by the end of September. And so in order for that to happen, if you give us comments, Charles will need to make revisions, and then we'll need to put it out. So I think 2 weeks from now would probably work. That would give Charles a pretty short turnaround time, but I mean, let me know, Charles, if that's doable. So that would be like September 6th.
It's doable. I mean, you will need to have internal review, Scott, before it can be put on the airwaves, so to speak. So
The 6th is a holiday. If you make it the 3rd, then we won't forget it.
Oh, very good.
I was actually about to say that too, Pam.
yeah, and that'll get it over with. So yeah, that works.
Cool.
Who are we supposed to send those comments to?
You can either send them to me or Charles. Well, they'll eventually all make it to Charles.
I'm thinking that it might be cleaner just to send them to Scott, and then Scott can basically unload them on me. That way we don't lose comments or whatever, because if some get to me and some get to them, there might be some confusion about us not knowing how many comments actually made it to and to whom. So I think maybe Scott's the best clearinghouse for this, if he's amenable to that.
Sure.
Chris, can you send us Scott's email?
Yes, I will do. I'll send Scott the list of names and email addresses for the subcommittee, so that way he can blast the method out to all of you at the same time. And then you'll have his email.
We
Perfect.
just want to make sure not to reply all.
Right. But again, we're not taking any formal action on it as a subcommittee in any way, shape, or form. It's only here to advise us on how to make our own document. So I think it's probably okay if you accidentally hit reply all. Anyone got any questions? All right, well, thanks, Scott and Charles. Before you head off, I'm going to double check and make sure we don't have any public comments. Last time I checked, we did not, so we'll leave them there. Should anyone have a comment that we need to read out?
Still no public comments.
Okay, great. So we're good. So thanks, Scott and Charles. Feel free to stick around if you want, or feel free to leave. It's up to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks. All right, so that's set to September 3rd. So I'll include that in our action items. And then again, for our own internal document, that'll be whenever the next meeting is, which I think I can open the floor to if anyone has any preference on when it should be. I think we should meet a little earlier. So it was quite a long time between the last one and this one. And I think if we want to try to get this done by the end of the year, I think we're going to need to pick up the pace on kind of when we meet.
How long was the last gap?
I think it was 5 weeks.
Okay.
It has to be at least 10 days from now, just because I need that time for posting.
All right.
So other than that, I have no qualms.
Is 3 weeks too soon for folks? So that'd
Looking
be
at like the week of the 13th or so.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be okay. Then we force ourselves to review the microplastics and then don't let it get too old in our minds.
Yeah.
What about the like Friday before the 10th? Would that be doable? I mean, I can include that as one of the dates on the poll.
I'd like to see it more like mid to later in the week of the 13th.
Okay, sounds good. Anyone else have any objections or comments? Okay, seeing a lot of head shake. So with that, I'll go over action items again. I think it was helpful for me to send out action items on the last meeting. I see a lot of heads shaking, so that's good. We have everyone except Judy, because she came in late, has something to do. Me is just administrative stuff. I don't have any document pieces to add, but maybe I'll squeeze some time in there for something like that. And then everyone has microplastics to review as an action item as well. Albeit if you don't have any comments for Scott, then you don't have any comments for Scott, right? He's happy to accept any, but if you don't have any, that's okay as well. So for Carol, you're going to take a look at the definitions section, kind of reorient that. Augustine, you're going to do general ordering of sections that we have, as well as the specificity and selectivity that you're working with Sam on parts of. Okay. Pam, you're working on measurement error, uncertainty, however you want to call it. And you're going to touch base with Carol as well on that one. And then microplastics. That's all I had. Was I missing anything?
Not for actions, but we did briefly talk about precision at the beginning, that maybe we need to clean that up.
Yeah.
And we were gonna ask for volunteers or volunteer somebody. Should we put that off to the next meeting, or what do you think?
I think we should have somebody touch on it, even if it's broad strokes, right? Because I think we need to have something on paper to at least, and we're trying to keep it broad. We're not trying to go super in detail about exactly what it needs to be. Go ahead,
You
Pam.
have something in there already. Maybe what we need to do is just all comment on that as we take time to digest it now.
Yeah,
and
that'd be great.
See what's missing.
Yeah, so what I'll do is this afternoon, I will send everybody a link to this document. And if you want to add comments in that link, so it'll be a Word file. You can open your browser, you can open Word. It'll save your comments, your changes, everything. And then I can compile all that stuff in time for our next meeting. That'd be great if you guys don't mind just putting some comments in there.
Mhm.
Okay, great. And then I'll get the final copy probably day of the next meeting, whenever that gets scheduled, which will be some point on the 13th.
Okay. And did you want me to send a reminder to folks beforehand if I'm missing sections or anything?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe a week before or a couple days before, if I don't have anything, then I'll send a real quick reminder.
That sounds good. Right. Does anyone have anything we want to touch on? Because we do have half an hour left scheduled.
I do have one quick, I guess, couple questions. So I did some of the stuff in sensitivity, and it was mostly MDL and MDL procedure and that stuff. But like we talked about earlier, we're not going to be doing procedures, how to do this, how to do that. So I could kind of take that way down. Does that make sense to just say you must determine an MDL if it's amenable to the method, if the method, technology is acceptable for that, or do you think I should keep procedures? I think if we're thinking about it from the perspective of the regulator and the method developer should know how to do that. If they don't know how to do it, they could look it up. I don't think the regulator needs to know the ins and outs of calculating an MDL. They don't need to have the table for the student's t-value. That's not necessary. Maybe we can just have a section saying, this is how you measure sensitivity. These are the things that people do, MDL, LDL, OQ, and that's it. Would that be reasonable for folks?
One thing that I know the regulators would be interested in understanding is that laboratories tend to do this on a clean matrix.
Yeah.
And so MDLs can vary from site to site and from matrix to matrix because they don't understand that. I've explained to them all that, if you really want a site-specific MDL, you're going to have to provide material for the laboratory to do it and pay for it. And then you can have a better idea of exactly what your MDLs are, or even at least there's been a couple sites where what they chose to do was to do a basically an LOD spike or matrix spike, just to kind of help determine variability at the reporting limit so that they have a better picture of things. So it is something that the regulators are not aware of. And so it would just be some sort of caveat that just kind of lets, in developing a method, you're usually developing a method for the specific compounds because it's the compounds that are the deal. And there may be an initial matrix such as this, the PFAS has been all focused on drinking water because that's where the push was. We know it's going to be expanded into soil. It's going to be expanded into all sorts of different matrices. Having a notation in there that the regulators are aware that if there's been any sort of matrix study done, it's been on the matrix of interest, and that most MDLs don't take into account the matrix of interest because there's so many potentials. I think that would be helpful for a regulating body to understand whether. I'm trying to get them to stop using MDLs.
Yeah.
So throwing stuff in there that says, you see why we say MDLs are not usable numbers, might, I sound like a broken record every time I talk to them, but it might help to see something in writing too.
Sure. Yeah. We can also update the definition to Pam's made up, M
Yes.
equals made up, which I like. I think that's perfect. Yeah, I think it's good. I could make a note on the fact that sensitivity is the absolute measure of sensitivity on the instrument outside of the matrix. This is what the technique can measure, and matrix will change it. And also, yeah, I think that makes sense.
Perfect.
It'd be more useful to have it that way.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think because that was actually something that I wanted to bring up as well, but we didn't jump into this section. But yeah, I think you have too much stuff here. And I think having maybe one paragraph about all of the different types, you had where did it go? On the notes from the checklist, you have all of the user-defined ways of doing sensitivity, MDL, LOD, LQ, the EPA's LC, MRL, right? Micro has their own LOD, assuming the detection volume. Wet has some weird thing, and then PCR has an LOD as well. That's different than standard LOD. So having maybe just one paragraph about like, this is what kind of in general this is, right? MDL is a statistical technique and LOD is a spike technique, same with the LOQ, that kind of thing.
And go back to our mission statement where we state that you're going to have to go to whoever you're developing this for specifically and look into their specific needs. So, all those that you just, named off, Chris, were all things that are specific to who you're going to be testing for. And so we just reference them all back to that, for more details on what may be required specifically for the end user you're developing this method for, there may be some additional definitions or activities that will need to be done. You will need to research that. And then we can take a lot of this out and step back a lot more in that sense, because we're not trying to cover everybody. I mean, I definitely looked at like the drinking water and the EPA hazardous waste documents and various things like that, because I wanted to see what they were all saying generally the same. Because if you have the general concept and everybody agrees to the general concept, that's what we want to put in here. And then we want to refer everybody to, okay, go to your specific programs to get more details.
Yep, I think it works. We'll make the changes and it'll be a better document. So I think that's all that I had. On the schedule, we just had the next meeting date, which I guess Christy will send out a poll for, right?
I'll want a quicker turnaround time on that the poll response. There's a lot of back end stuff to get a meeting of our public meeting notice out and make sure we have a Zoom count and things like that. So
Cool. I think that's all that I had.
anyone else? All right, with that, I think we're ready to close out the meeting. So thanks, everyone. Get another 20 minutes back of the rest of your Monday afternoon. Hopefully everyone's August calms down a little bit and you get some time to work on some subcommittee documents and more fun things. So thanks everyone for coming, and I'll see you in 3-ish weeks.
Thank
Sounds good.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.